So we have a fantastic program for you today. We're going to first of all hear a little bit about how this film came to be made by the Drugs and Disorder Project Positive Negatives. And then we will have the screening of the film, which is I think it's about 12 minutes. And then we'll have a panel discussion with the different participants who've been involved in the making of the film to discuss a bit what it tells us about the current situation today in Colombia, how art can be involved in raising awareness about peace and the tremendous struggles that are faced by Colombia at the moment with regards to peace building. And collaboration between artists and academics and all the lessons that have been learned in the process. So for those of you who haven't come across Rodemos Diálogo before, I'll just mention very briefly who we are. We're a transnational organization of Colombians and Friends of Colombia based in the UK and Colombia and also in various other places around the world, who support a negotiated solution to the armed conflict in Colombia, and who also believe in building a culture of dialogue as part of what it means to build peace from civil society. And some of the work that we do can be found on our website, rodemosdialogo.org. And we have various teams working on different thematic issues to do with the peace process, from transitional justice and the Truth Commission, to work with academia, work with the private sector, and work doing peace pedagogy in schools. So please do visit our website if you'd like to find out more. We have 6 principles that we try to put into practice in all of the spaces that we run, including this one. So I'm going to just run through the principles to invite you to follow these principles today in the dialogue that we're going to have around this film. The first one is respect, and respect for the word and the opinion of the other. The second is honesty, to be able to share what you truly feel without fear of being stigmatized for it. The third one is generosity, to really come and give the best of yourself in this space that we're going to have together, this hour and a half that we're going to share. The fourth principle is solidarity, it means many things to us, including the ability to put oneself in the shoes of the other. But I think on a day like today, when we're launching this film, it's just very clear that the solidarity of all of us who care about Colombia is with those who are suffering the tremendous surge in violence in the regions most affected by the war in Colombia at the moment. And Intigrillos, the art collective responsible for this beautiful animation from an artistic perspective, are in Putumayo, and they have to live with the conflict and see it every day. So we're extremely grateful to be with you, and we know that you have friends and colleagues who have been suffering in the conflict, so all our solidarity with them. The fifth principle is self-criticism. We know that none of us have all of the answers, and we're always in spaces of dialogue willing to revise our opinions and be changed by dialogue, allow ourselves to be changed by the encounter with the other and other points of view. And the sixth and final principle is co-responsibility, because we do believe that really building peace is something that we all have a part in. And as academics, I think that co-responsibility is a really important principle. And this beautiful project is an example of something that academics can do if they go beyond the kind of ballpark that we often get put in, to stretch themselves and work with artists to try to have an impact that goes beyond just our research publications. So those are our 6 principles, and we've had the links of the different organizations that I've mentioned have been placed in the chat by Sarah. I think I just want to have a shout out moment here. We're lucky enough to have in the audience with us today, Jonathan Goodhand, who's principal investigator of this Drugs and Disorder Project in SOAS. So it's a fantastic honor to have him. And if we have any questions about the broader project, perhaps we might encourage him to say something about them. And also Benjamin Dix, director of Positive Negative, with his beautiful son Ezra, is joining us today, who's responsible for this fantastic project of creating a company that helps to make illustrated outputs of academic research to have enable academic research to have a bigger impact on the world and help it be understood beyond the circle of academia that it's often restricted to. Just to mention, the film that we're going to be seeing today is the English version of the film, but there is also a Spanish version of the film, and we are doing this same event, a launch event in Spanish, also hosted by Rodemos Diálogo tomorrow. So you can find, I think Karen, who's the director of Rodemos Diálogo in Colombia, will share the invitation to that in the chat now, in case any of you have colleagues in Colombia or other places in Latin America where they would be interested in seeing the launch of the film in Spanish. So to kick off with, I'm going to ask, first of all, before we see the film, for a brief presentation of what this film is and what role it plays in the wider research project, from Sarah Wong, who is Research and Project Manager for Positive Negatives. So Sarah, over to you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thanks so much, Gwen, for chairing this conversation. And a big thanks as well to Embrace Dialogue for facilitating this event, and to everyone joining from around the world today. We are really, really excited to share this piece with you today, and to discuss our reflections from making it. As Gwen said, I'm Sarah. I'm a research and project manager at Positive Negatives for the Drugs and Disorder Project, of which this animation and partnership is a part of. Before we dive into the animation and have a kind of screening together, I just wanted to give a little bit of background around how and why we came together for this partnership and to make this film together. So for around a decade or so now, Positive Negatives has been researching and producing comics and animations and other narrative-based visual media on various global and social issues, with artists from around the world, really. So often that means collaborating with academics and working directly with academic research to do so, as is the case here. So when we were brought on board for the Drugs and Disorder Project, which is an international and interdisciplinary research consortium exploring drugs and peace building in Colombia, but also in Myanmar and in Afghanistan, we knew that this would be our remit for the project here as well. I think the difference with this project, as opposed to others that we had worked on, was really the length at which we could engage with the partners in the project and the research material itself. So this is a 4-year project that's really just coming to an end now. And through the co-production of these different creative outputs, it's allowed us to really build a long-lasting and kind of grounded partnership that will live beyond the project itself. So as we progressed within the project as an organization, we kind of reflected and decided that we really needed to seek out subject-specific expertise to be able to facilitate this whole process of creative collaboration. We knew that we didn't have this expertise internally, so that's when we really started to work with Andre, who you'll hear from after the animation. We also knew that we wanted to produce an animation, given the reach that they often have, but that this is often a very kind of labor and time intensive process that requires quite specific skills and tools, which often have quite a high barrier for entry. So after Andre first met Integrios and kind of initiated that first conversation to start a collaboration between our organizations, we decided to pilot this partnership within the co-production of a comic. Based on the logic that a comic has a bit less moving parts to feed into than an animation. So in 2020, we released a story about Jessica, a social leader from Putumayo, which was informed by research from the National University of Colombia. And this was written by Andre and drawn by Integrios. So off the back of this success and the successful process of that whole co-production, that's really how we started to work together on this animation. And we were also able to work with Diana Garcia, who I'm hoping can manage to connect to this event. I know she's in Colombia and in quite a remote area, so I think she might have some connection issues, but let's hope she's able to join us. Diana is a brilliant animator, illustrator based in London, and she really worked to upskill various members of the Integrios Collective in animation and illustration for animation specifically. So I think it's just worth noting and reiterating that this was both the first comic, Jessica's story, as well as the first animation, Colombia's Broken Peace, which we're about to screen, that Integrios had ever worked on. And I think the success of that process and the successful outputs are just absolutely a product of the sort of relentless creativity, passion, and ingenuity of everyone involved. So the Integrios team, Diana and Andre as well. I won't go too much into the kind of research grounding and the subject matter of the animation, because as I said, that's not where our expertise lies as an organization. But I'd really encourage you to dig into the drugs and disorder publications if you did want to learn more about the research. And I know that Andre and the Integrios Collective will be able to speak to those aspects better, especially given their own lived experience as a grassroots organizing collective in Putumayo, as Gwen mentioned. So yeah, finally, just to say, this whole process has been a massive capacity building exercise for all of us. I think we've all learned a huge amount about co-production, how to upskill artists, working as a collective, collaborating with grassroots organizations. And it's not been without its challenges, least of all language or a global pandemic or a whole host of political issues or turmoil in each of our respective places. But it's been, above all, a really incredible and enjoyable experience to work on with this team. And I've just learned a huge amount myself, and I've enjoyed it throughout. So without further ado, I'm happy to get more into any of our specific reflections within the process throughout in the Q&A, but I really look forward to the discussion, and let's watch the animation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So now I think we're going to have Andre's screen spotlighted, because Andre is going to be sharing the film from his computer. So maybe just give us a second with the tech. Andre? Laura? Andre, we're not hearing the sound. Can you start it again from the beginning and unmute yourself?
This is a coca plant, from which cocaine is derived. For many of Colombia's poor, coca crops are the only way to make a living. Farmers started growing coca crops in this part of Colombia, Tumaco, in the early 2000s. Soon after, guerrillas from the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, moved into the territory. For years, there were conflicts between the Colombian government and the FARC. All too often, this led to violence. In 2016, a peace agreement was negotiated between the FARC and the government. In the agreement, the government promised regional development plans and crop substitution programs to help dismantle the illegal drug economy. Many Colombians clung to the hope of lasting peace. This is Roger, an Afro-Colombian leader, and Joanna, a peasant farmer. They live in Nariño, Colombia. These are their stories.
I used to work on farms in Putumayo, but there was too much violence and my family wasn't safe. Our friends suggested we start again in Nariño. So we left. We migrated, along with many others like us, to Alto Mira. We found a small farm with enough land to grow coca and food crops. Our children were out of harm's way. We were a happy family for a while. But a few years later, my husband and I split up. I was heartbroken. Growing coca and food crops is hard work. My children helped me to keep going, to keep working the farm. But the work was getting harder. I couldn't keep up. That's when I found out I had cancer. I used all our savings to pay for medical treatment. We were going hungry, so I looked for help. Some people rejected me. They blamed us for bringing coca crops and the increasing violence to the area. But I found others who were supportive, people who helped each other. Soon the FARC were in the area. The community paid taxes to them using coca farm profits, and they intervened in local conflicts between communities. Things were okay. Then the government planes arrived. The planes flew over our farms, spraying our crops with glyphosate herbicide. They wanted to kill all the coca crops, but they killed everything, even our food crops. The armed conflict between the FARC and the government flared up again. After everything we'd been through, we still couldn't get away from the violence.
I knew something had to change. The way things were between the FARC and the government, it couldn't go on. Still, I had doubts about the peace negotiations in Havana. Communities like mine weren't even invited. While the FARC and government talked about peace in Cuba, in Alto Mira nothing changed. But then, at the last minute, they opened a small space in the negotiations for ethnic minorities. Finally, we had a chance to give our views on peace. In the peace agreement, the FARC pledged to disarm. No more conflict, no more violence. In return, the government pledged to help develop our regions and stop the illegal drug trade. The day it was signed, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, peace was possible. Then the referendum was held, and Colombians rejected the peace agreement. I couldn't believe it. I thought they must be living in other places without the violence and chaos we knew. I think that's when I started losing hope for lasting peace.
I never had much faith in the referendum. I always told my kids, nothing will ever change. After people voted against the peace agreement, the FARC didn't disarm straight away. I think they were scared. A modified agreement was passed by Congress, and many FARC moved to a nearby demobilization zone and gave up their weapons. Conditions were bad in the demobilization zones. They built sheds to live in. Other armed groups started attacking them, and peace commitments remained unmet. So some of the FARC picked up their guns again. These groups were all fighting for control of the illegal drug economy. Campesinos like me, we didn't have much to feel hopeful about then.
I first met Joanna when we started going to local meetings. She was with her community group, I was with mine. We discussed things like farming development plans and the voluntary coca crop substitution programs that the government organized. Instead of sending in planes to spray and kill our crops, the government promised to give us resources so that we could eradicate the coca crops ourselves and plant legal crops instead. We received the first payment, but it wasn't the amount they promised. There was a second payment, but it was delayed. What's more, there were farmers who wanted to sign up for the crop substitution program, but they weren't included. I went to more meetings where they talked about building an aqueduct and an irrigation system to help boost legitimate local economies. But the building work never started. People told us, "You're naive to trust the government." They were right. Promises were either broken or unfulfilled. The government left us with no coca and no other way to make a living. So we organized protests.
Soon after the protests started, the Colombian army started destroying our crops again. We organized a picket line to try and stop them. We told them that we wanted the substitution program and no more violence. The army started firing at us. We were unarmed protesters. I even took my children along. The Colombian army killed some of the demonstrators, and they blamed FARC dissidents.
So here we are. Coca crops continue to grow. Every week, peasants involved in the government's farming development programs and voluntary crop substitution program are killed. The army is eradicating our crops with force and shooting at us when we protest. And former FARC combatants who disarmed are also being killed. We get caught in the middle. COVID-19 has made everything worse. All the promises made in the peace agreement have been broken. We've gone backwards. Things are worse now than 10 years ago. Today, this is no man's land. All these massacres of young people, and now this lockdown. I don't have much hope for the future. Peace is still far away for me.
Today, Nariño's Pacific region is overwhelmed by violence, poverty, drug trafficking, and now COVID-19. Despite growing threats of violence, Afro-Colombian leaders, peasant farmers, social leaders, and indigenous activists continue to organize and advocate for their communities. Meanwhile, illegal economies continue to profit from the territory, and peace remains elusive.
Thank you, Andre, for screening that. It's hard to know what to say after that film because it's such a moving film. I think its great strength is being able to show, I think, both the incredible kind of political complexity of the implementation of this complex peace agreement and also the tragedy of the human stories. And the impact on all of these different human lives in different ways. And it's so sad to hear these phrases, we are going backwards, things are getting worse. And of course, for many of us who do research on Colombia, this is not news. The Colombian peace process is struggling hugely and needs all the solidarity that academia and international community and organizations can give. And I think that the animation is a really good way to raise awareness about that. So now I want to ask the artists to speak. I just want to introduce them all. We have here with us from the Intigrillos Art Collective in Putumayo, a region next door to Nariño, where the film is set. We have Diego Arteaga, who's the project manager. We have Ruben Madrid, who's responsible for the beautiful music. Jonathan Acosta, who's been in charge of many of the images and the drawings. And Sebastian Arbaez, who together with Diana Garcia has been involved in the production of the actual animation. And I'd like to ask Diego to just share with us a little bit, maybe, what was it like for you working on this project of this animation, and how does this story represent a reality that you're seeing also in your own region? Does it speak to what you're able to see, and why is it important for you to be able to make a film about this story? And just for the audience to be aware, Diego is going to speak in Spanish, and then Natalia is going to translate for him.
Hola, buenas tardes. Para nosotros es un gusto estar el día de hoy aquí. El trabajo es una bella forma de mostrar la triste realidad de los territorios del sur del país. Sin embargo, fue un gran reto para el colectivo y los compañeros poder sacar esta producción adelante en medio de las situaciones de conflicto y las distancias operativas con las que nos organizamos conjuntamente con Andrei y todo el equipo de Positive en Inglaterra y ellos acá. Sin embargo, fue un gran placer.
Hello, everyone. For us, it's a pleasure to be here. The work is the most beautiful way to show our sad reality in the territories of Colombian South. It was a very big challenge to pull this production off, especially regarding the operative distance. Nevertheless, it was a great experience.
And also maybe just to mention, he also said that it was a great challenge to do this work in the midst of this reality of the conflict that's depicted in the film. Diego, ¿quieres seguir?
Bueno, el trabajo es una primera experiencia, es un trabajo cargado de mucha realidad de la coyuntura de los territorios en estos 5 años de posconflicto. Es uno de los primeros materiales audiovisuales que retratan, que muestran la situación de incumplimiento frente al tema de cultivos ilícitos tan importante para el mundo entero. Es una...
The work is our first experience and is filled with a lot of reality that reflects what's going on in the territories within the first 5 years of the peace of the post-conflict. And here's the first audiovisual material that presents the reality about illicit crops.
Es la oportunidad en donde el colectivo conjuntamente pudo mostrar capacidades creativas en todas las técnicas para poder producir esta muestra. Rubén, J, Sebastián, Diana, con la articulación de Ben, Sara, Andrei, sí, fue una madurez también para el equipo acá en Colombia, poder trabajar de esa manera.
It was also the opportunity for the collective to show their creative capacities in all different techniques to produce this piece. And he mentions his partners are Sebastian, Sara, Andre, and so many people who made this possible.
Y bueno, también cabe agradecer la oportunidad que se brindó para este grupo de artistas irreverentes de acá del sur del país y darnos la oportunidad para mostrar las realidades propias que nos acontecen y que de alguna manera queremos darle color y generar una ventana para que el mundo vea que hay posibilidad de cambios acá en Colombia y acá en las regiones.
It is also worth thanking the opportunity that was given to this artist, irreverent artist, and the chance to share our own realities. We want to give them color, and that that the world sees that we can generate change for Colombia and its regions.
No, de mi parte, muy agradecido por la atención que prestan las personas en este momento, desde allá, desde el corazón de acá de Colombia. Qué bueno que puedan ver estos materiales, los puedan compartir y muchas gracias en verdad para todas y todos.
For my part, I am very grateful for the attention you're paying to this piece, and it's so good that you could be able to share it and analyze it with people you know over there.
Thank you so much, Diego, and the rest of the colectivo. I think that one of the fantastic things about this collaboration is that rather than hiring an illustrator from the global north, you guys have actually worked with a collective of artists who are in the same region as the story, and through this collaboration you've been able to strengthen this collective's capacity. It's the first animation that they've done, as we've heard, and it's also the first animation that Positive Negatives have done. So it's really, I think, an example of peace building from civil society through transnational collaborations, which is so important, being able to strengthen the work that Integrillos is doing in Colombia and helping them bring their art to a wider public. I'd now like to invite Andre to join the conversation. So Andre Gomez Suarez is a senior research fellow at the University of Winchester in the Center for Religion, Reconciliation and Peace. And he's also senior consultant for Positive Negative. And he's been responsible in this project for liaising between Integrillos and the National University, who are the university that's been carrying out the research on this wider project, which, as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, is a wider project, the Drugs and Disorder Project, that is comparative. This is between Myanmar, Afghanistan, and Colombia, and we're just focusing in on the Colombia wing of the project. Andre, tell us a bit about what it's been like for you liaising between Positive Negatives, the National University, and Integrillos. How did you select this story of these characters in the film, and how have you worked with Integrillos to make this film a reality? And if I can also squeeze another question in there, how does this film speak to the current situation in Colombia in terms of implementation of the peace agreement?
Thank you, Gwen. Well, that's quite a lot there, but let me just say that I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I mean, it's been fantastic to be part of PostNEC. Working with Sarah, with Ben has been amazing, and seeing the ethos of this organization that really wants to work with grassroots organizations in Colombia is amazing. It's been amazing to work with Diego. I mean, I still, have in my mind those Friday afternoons working together and thinking about the drawings and thinking about, the ideas. How can we sacarla del estadio, as we used to say in our meetings? How are we going to kick the ball out of the stadium and just make it big? And finally, when you get the chance to see this and share it with people outside of this bubble that we had for more than a year and a half, it's just amazing. So I'm truly excited to be here and to be sharing this with everyone. I believe in serendipity, if you want to call it, or in spontaneity. And I think all of this work was just joining dots. I've got the chance to meet Diego back when we were working with the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace and Rodemos el Diálogo on a project about changing the narratives in Colombia. And this was back in 2018, and then I came back to the UK and got the chance to meet with Sarah and to start thinking about this drugs and disorder project and the idea of wanting to do an animation out of a research that the National University of Colombia was doing in 4 regions of the country: Putumayo, Tumaco, Catatumbo, and Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. And when we started sharing these ideas and thinking about how we could do this happen, to my mind came the work that Diego had done and Intigrillos had done for this project. And I knew that what they had done in the past was mainly murals. So they were very good at painting walls. And suddenly I thought, well, but if we really want to try to get this done from someone in Colombia, no one better than someone who is actually in Putumayo, and that research that is being done in Putumayo is put into a graphic novel. So the first graphic novel came into being, and the timings of delivering the products and how committed Intigrillos were really blow our mind in PostNEC. We were like, wow, they would fulfill every single deadline on time, and they would give us more than what we were expecting. And when we finished that we thought, okay, let's go to the next sort of thing. But the next thing was a big thing. It was doing an animation. So the UNAL team, led by Professor Francisco Gutierrez, had been doing hundreds of interviews in Putumayo, in Nariño. So we moved from Putumayo, where they were doing, where actually Intigrillos is based and where the first part of the research was done, to Nariño, that is a county next to Putumayo, but with in the Pacific Ocean. And in that region, the IEPRI team, the UNAL team, had been doing hundreds of interviewing people, and this is a really complex region. It's even more violent than Putumayo, or it's been killings of social leaders taking place. All the problem of coca crops was unfolding there, and they didn't really know how to tease out and how we could select something that could really show the complexity of what was happening there. So what I did was we selected probably a big number of interviews, and then I read through them, and we selected 2 main stories that seem to condense some of the things that have been said, and we fictionalized them. So we started to put these ideas together out of those interviews and creating these 2 fictional characters that we call Joanna and Roger. And the whole idea was that this is not based on opinions. This is based on more than 2.5 years of research on the ground by the UNAL team. Then once the interviews were anonymized and curated, they gave it to us. I did all the reading, I extracted the information, and I wrote a first script that I share with the team. The team loved the idea. They gave me feedback, and with the team I mean Sarah, Ben, and of course Intigrillos, because they were very close to Nariño and we wanted to build this together. So out of that feedback that they gave me, we started working with UNAL. We showed it to UNAL. They made comments, and we started trying to get to the point of getting to a script that and then the next challenge was to put that into visuals. That's what Integrious did. Jonathan worked really, really hard in drawing the images, doing a beautiful work. And then we started testing sounds. Ruben started working on that. And then once we had a first sort of animatrix of this, Sebastián started working on the animation with Diana Garcia from London. And I was accompanying them. I didn't have the technical expertise, but what I was trying to do was to curate the script to get to the point where we were happy with this, and then we, with all the direction of Ben and Sarah and an external script writer, we finally agreed on this final story that you can see. And I would say that towards the end, it was a really hard work for Sebastián and for Diana and for all the team trying to put all the pieces together. And when we saw it the first time, our eyes were blown away. So for me, this is absolutely fundamental, and this is how it came into being. And let me just close the second question that you have made by telling people who don't really know the reality of Colombia that this research shows how difficult it is for Colombians in some of the regions of the country to believe in peace. And it's difficult because the Colombian government has broken its promise to implement point 4 of the peace agreement, has left the people hanging. People feel there that at the beginning of the implementation of the peace agreement, the Colombian government was committed to listening. It wasn't easy, but at least the Colombian government was committed to listening to people and to try to build something together with the communities. But they feel that since 2018, with the arrival of a new government, they have been sidelined, they have been stigmatized, and that the Colombian government has broken the promise of doing the transformations that were needed in these territories in order to transform war economies into peace economies. And now violence has come back to these regions. Social leaders who actually promoted the peace process with the FARC, who were committed to implementation of the peace agreement, have been killed and are being killed by different actors. And the Colombian government, unfortunately, is trying to push for aerial spraying with glyphosate and is pushing for militaristic measures that are not going to solve the issues and the problems of the communities on the ground.
Thank you, Andre. Okay, well, on that note, I think we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience, and we'll have also Sarah on hand to answer any further questions. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, on hand all of the artists involved in producing this beautiful film. So if anyone has any questions specifically about the music or the drawing or the technicalities, then we'll make sure we'll direct it to the specific collective member. But if anyone who would like to ask questions would just like to raise your hand using the hand raising function or write a question in the chat. I've seen that someone, Christina, wrote how it was a really powerful film, thank you, and asked if it would be available anywhere online. And the link to the film has been shared in the chat. So please do share it. It is publicly available. It's a fantastic resource for anyone who is working on either teaching about Colombia or peace processes or drugs and drug trafficking, or anyone who is trying to raise awareness about things like that. And perhaps while everyone else gets their questions, comes up with questions, I will ask a question. And I don't know who's the right person to answer this, maybe Sarah, maybe Andre. How do you hope that this animation is going to have an impact? How do you hope it's going to be used, and how do you hope it's going to circulate? I don't know which of you would like to respond to that question.
Would you like to respond, Andre? Go ahead. I think, yeah, okay. I'll say a bit, and then I think you can probably say more and probably more eloquently. I mean, I guess first and foremost, how I hope this animation will have an impact is to really humanize the stories behind drug production more broadly, but specifically in Colombia. I think that was a sort of wider aim for this whole project. Just because narratives around drugs, around illicit economies, even around conflict, can be so stigmatized and impersonal. And I think this story and the comic itself as well that we produced really shows the human impact, like you said, Gwen, behind all of these issues, and really contextualizes these issues in a way that, we hope audiences will empathize with, really, and learn from. So yeah, I'll keep that brief. I'm sure Andre will have much more to say that's specific to the context, but I think our overall aim is to really just humanize these stories and to try to build empathy with wider audiences.
Yeah, I let me put it in I guess 2 ways. We the Drugs and Disorder project is a big project with more than 15 partners. The National University is one of them. But the animation was already shared in a conference that was organized last week for academics and practitioners and stakeholders, so that they were aware of how all these. Of course, out of this research that we are showing this animation, many articles are gonna have been published. I mean, one in Third World Quarterly explaining the situation in Colombia in terms of illicit crops. But we know that academic articles are read by few people. And we know that practitioners sometimes don't even read these articles because they don't have the time to do that. So we believe, and the project has this idea that, the animation was part of having a broader impact and is being disseminated to those stakeholders in order to reach audiences in different countries, because the partners come, as Sarah said, from Afghanistan, from Myanmar, and we have many partners in the UK, and we've been engaging in the Drugs and Disorder project with the FCDO and many other policymakers. And of course, there is a dimension of all the publications and the things that are coming out, at some point can make reference also to the animation. We know that there are conferences organized by the UN, and hopefully, we'll be able to share this so that people can discuss this with something that brings the reality and the emotions of people on the ground. So that's in terms of policymakers. And in terms of Colombia, we and Rodemos el Diálogo is committed also to try to disseminate this further. We did this event. We invited as many people as we could, academics working in different areas across the UK. And in Colombia, we are trying to do the same. So Diego and Inti Grillos in Colombia have invited many of their friends and other social movements in the region to come to the launch of the animation tomorrow. The animation will be publicly available, and through partnerships of grassroots organizations that they have, and we have, Rodemos el Diálogo, in Colombia, we will try to share this as broadly as possible. And the National University of Colombia has partnerships with different organizations, with even the El Espectador newspaper, and hopefully out of all of these projects, we expect that this really reaches farther away than one academic article could do. So that's a bit of the things that we will expect to happen in the near future.
Okay, thanks, Andre and Sarah. We have a question from Karen.
Yes, Gwen, thank you so much. I'm really, really impressive. And first of all, I would like to congratulate Inti Grillos, Diego, all the team. I think that this is a really, really fantastic animation. Really touch my heart, because I think this shows the power of art, to tell stories. And I would love to meet the designer. It's just beautiful, the colors, the characters, the landscapes. I was really transported into the story. So really, thank you so much to transported all of us in this. And I also find this audience very incredible. because I think it's not so easy to find the balance or this collaboration work in between academies and an artist, no? So I think shows a different form of collaborative work between them, no? And I think it's challenging us about how the academy can have a direct impact on what is happening in remote regions like Putumayo, Nariño, Caquetá in Colombia. And what you say about these meetings, Andre and Sarah, with the strategic actors and yes, stakeholders and other academies and other. So I was wondering, in that way, if could it be that the academy should reconsider in that sense, no? So my question, maybe for Sarah, Andre, also for Diego, is how to invite other academics to not just writing books and papers that, as you say, maybe just read a few people in this space. That I think that has been one of the great criticisms of the academy, no? And specifically for Diego, in the other hand, how easy is it to work with academics also, no? And finally, just a specific question for the Diego and Integrillos team is how was the process of the script, no, and the music, because I think that take too long to review, no, write the script, the characters. So I want to know more about it.
Thank you, Karen. In the interest of time, there's another question that's been written in the chat, and I think what we should do is collect all the questions together and then go back to the ones that have been, because Karen's asked questions to all of you. But there's a question in the chat from someone whose name is iPhone that says, since the peace process took place, has Colombia's output of cocaine decreased at all, or have other groups stepped in, and has there not been any change in output? And I think I might direct that question to Andre as our context expert. So I think we have a lot of questions on the table for Integrillos. Perhaps first of all, I think Karen asked about the images. So I think that's Jonathan. They are absolutely beautiful. If you'd like to talk a bit about that, the process of the images, the music, Ruen, and for Diego, how easy is it to work with academics? There's a bunch of questions for all of you there.
Bueno, Integrillos como estrategia entiende y comprende el valor del arte, y a raíz de estos años de trabajo hemos logrado construir un camino entre lo académico y lo artístico. Entonces, el contenido que nosotros mostramos es un gran contenido investigativo en territorio, etnográfico, que se refleja a través de colores o de las dinámicas artísticas que empleamos, murales, cómics, animes y las participaciones que hacemos en diferentes escenarios con arte. Al inicio.
Thank you, Diego. Integrillos, as a strategy, it understands the value of art And we have built a road between the academic and the artistic. This is a research content from the territory, ethnographical, translated in color, images, and music.
Con Andrei, imaginándonos este proceso como un laboratorio creativo en función de visibilizar las circunstancias sociales y humanas frente al acuerdo de paz y a lo que está sucediendo. Más que arte y más que académicos, estamos abriendo un campo entre lo investigativo y lo artístico, y se está poniendo en función acá en los territorios donde no vienen los académicos. De pronto esa es como la invitación a que bajen a territorio y construyan desde acá, desde donde están sucediendo lo más como interesante actualmente en Colombia. Gracias.
At the beginning, we agreed with Andre how to imagine this process as a creative laboratory. This is about social conditions and human beings and what is actually going on. It's beyond art and academics. This is what is actually the reality of our territories. So this is also an invitation for you to come and build within territory where these issues are actually taking place.
Thank you, Diego. And maybe we could hear a little bit about the music from Ruben. What is the music that we're listening to? And how was the process of recording the soundtrack for this film?
Hola, buenos días, un saludo para todos. Bueno, en realidad, como ya lo hemos mencionado, dentro del colectivo cada una de las personas desempeñan diferentes habilidades, ¿cierto? Aportamos de diferentes habilidades. En este caso, desde la música fue mi aporte, pero en realidad todo desde un principio y cada una de las acciones, desde el color, desde la música, desde el guión, fue trabajado en equipo, ¿cierto? No solo por Intigrillos, sino también por Positive Negatives, donde nos convertimos en un solo equipo y donde todos y constantemente a través de diferentes reuniones que se hacían semanalmente íbamos revisando cosa por cosa. Entonces fue un proceso muy importante. Digamos que mi proceso, mi trabajo era recopilar todas las emociones, todo lo que nosotros considerábamos que debería estar allí, y también dentro de la instrumentación y los sonidos típicos de las regiones de donde se está contando la historia, obviamente, ¿cierto? Entonces fue un construir de mucha propuesta, de mucho ensayo y error, donde todos absolutamente participamos. No, eso no fue en un solo intento, fueron muchísimas veces las que volvimos a borrar, volvimos a corregir. Y bueno, la ventaja pues es que nosotros conocemos... Espera. Sigo, Nata.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. In fact, we are part of the collective, and each person of this collective has something to share regarding their skills. In my case, this is the music, but everything was a collective work, including all the exchange we did with Positive Negatives, all the weekly meetings. We reviewed thing by thing, and regarding the music, we try to collect the emotions and represent them through the instruments that represent the regions, the typical instruments from the regions where this was taking place. And it was a work of trying and reviewing, and also very, very collective, as I mentioned it before.
Thank you, Ruben. And it was absolutely wonderful to hear the music that transported me immediately to the Colombian Pacific and all of those different instruments which evoke the sounds of that region. Perhaps in the interest of time, we should now go to the other questions that we had. We had one for Sarah. How to get more academics to do this?
Yeah, thanks, Gwen. It's a very good question. I think part of that process is, holding conversations like this that sort of demystify the process. Because I think often it's a little bit, it might even be a little bit of a trend to try to kind of collaborate with artists or collaborate with creatives and within academia to try to, to have further impact. But I think actually when you dig down into it, there are very few, like resources or templates. Not that there necessarily should be, because I think oftentimes these projects and the people within them and the context that you're working in and everything is so specific that you can't really duplicate them. But there is fairly little guidance out there on how to do this. And I think just having a more open and transparent conversation around what the actual challenges are is probably, kind of a useful first step more than anything else. So I don't know. I don't know if there's one answer to that, but just to say that it's a really, if people are thinking about doing this kind of work, it's a really fruitful, like incredibly interesting process. And I think a lot of the learnings that come from it are unexpected, and they're almost within the production process and the collaboration and the partnership itself. Beyond what you're creating and the impact that you're trying to have externally. I think so much of what you learn from collaborating across the arts and research come from your own reflections internally. So yeah, I think just a general call to to kind of be willing to try this sort of interdisciplinary work, and then to just be reflexive throughout as well. I think that's a really important aspect, is to be reflecting on what you're doing throughout the process, and how you might improve it, and what mistakes you've made kind of along the way. Because it can be, I think, and maybe even, I don't know if Ben is here, he's turned his camera off, but this is kind of, oh, he's back, okay. He might be able to speak to this better, just because he's got many more years of experience of doing this kind of bridging work. But I think, for me, starting this work a few years ago, it can be quite scary, because you don't really know what you're doing, and you're kind of just charting your own path. And it can be a bit intimidating and uneasy and uncomfortable. So it's not about necessarily saying, oh, I know exactly what to do now, and like throwing a template on it, but just, I guess, being almost comfortable with that discomfort, and just knowing that when you're doing this kind of work, it's going to be a little bit rocky at times, but in a good way and in a productive way, and to see all of those as interesting learnings.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that's great. Seeing as you've called him out, it would be maybe great to get Ben, if you'd like to say anything to this issue. I mean, you guys at Positive Negatives are clearly blazing the pathway for others to follow, and making that service available for academics to translate their work into illustrated means. Do you want to say something to this issue about how to increase it, and how to increase the power of art to help academia actually have an impact in the world?
Thank you. Sorry, excuse me. I'm as you can see, looking after my son today. I think Sarah summed it up really well, and I think a lot of it, I think, has to do with once you've found the people who want to collaborate, whether they're academics or artists or collectives, it's about us getting out the way as producers. And I think this is something that Sarah has done. Sarah takes full credit for this project. I've really been on the sidelines, and I think the skillful thing that she does is to get out of the way and allow the experts, whether it's Andre who knows the context, or whether it's Intriguios who understands the art and the context of living it, or it's Diana knowing the animation, and allow the experts in their fields to create something quite special. And I think that's something as academics we often get in the way of these collaborations. And it's not every, I mean, positive negatives, I think we've produced now over 70 comics and animations on a huge variety of topics. So I'm never really concerned about the topic, the issue, the theme, the discipline that we're going to make something on. What I'm more concerned about is the team, whether it's from the academic team or the artistic team. That's what makes or breaks one of these projects. And then when you have something like this that we produced, this is such an organic collaboration with such a team of people that really want to build something and produce something and tell such an important story and a personal story to them. And then the success of this is all of that energy in disseminating it and getting it out and getting the new audiences that aren't going to read a 50-page peer-reviewed article. They're not going to read it, but they will watch this film. And that excites certain groups of academics to say, okay, there's a space for that article and there's a space for this film. But if you want to bring new audiences to understand these important topics, this traditional way of sending out, we don't even send out peer-reviewed articles where they're locked away and you have to have a particular space to be able to access them or even know they're there. So it's finding academic teams that really understand the power of this visual storytelling, this collaboration with local artists to tell something very powerful in a completely new way and use all of the new tools that we have at our disposal, whether it's, you know, YouTube and iPhone and social media and all these things that traditional academia kind of doesn't sit very well on these platforms, but visual materials, visual storytelling sits perfectly well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I wanted to say.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Great to have Benjamin Dix, Director of Positive Negatives, here with us today. And we'll finish the event with Andre, if you'd like to say a few words about this question on cocaine. And maybe I think it's quite appropriate perhaps to finish with the question on the impact of the peace agreement on the issue of drug trafficking in Colombia more broadly. If you could speak to this a little bit so that we can remember what's at stake in this topic that has been so beautifully shown through the film.
Thank you, Gwen. I also probably just want to add a bit about the conversation we were having about academics and art. And I think that Ben and Sarah have said it beautifully. I mean, it's a risk that and it's uncomfortable sometimes. And I think the best way to put it for an academic is that we are trained to see the complexity behind issues, to try to understand all the different components that in let's say drug trafficking converge into these war economies. So that means that, you know, we try to identify the different elements and create very complex pictures in our heads that are not straightforward answers to the questions. And when you really want to do an animation or a graphic novel, you have to go back the other way. So if you keep it complex, you are not gonna get this done. And for academics, that's very challenging because it feels like you are simplifying the issue. But I think that's, again, the beauty of it, because so many of the problems that we have in the world today have not been solved because the majority of the people are completely detached from these issues. This has not touched their hearts. And we as academics have a responsibility. And I think that now that, you know, impact in the UK at least is coming into play, so many academics are trying to find a way to get their research disseminated. But they don't want to really get their hands dirty into doing the part of the going from the complexity to the simplicity and working with the artists. So they probably hire someone to do the brokering side with the artist, but they don't necessarily engage into this. And the beauty of this is that Sarah is doing a PhD on this now. Ben has got a PhD in anthropology. I have my own. So I'm an academic. And what we actually did, and I think that's absolutely true of what Ben was saying here and Diego has said, is we met as one team on Friday afternoons to work together and to share like the different understandings that we had in order to try to move away from complexity, but being faithful to the issues that were at stake. So we didn't want to go to the other extreme. It needed to be done in such a creative way that needed to convey what really was at stake, but without sort of making it difficult for people to just switch off the animation when they were in minute 5 saying this is absolutely boring, I'm not getting anything out of this. And that sort of multidisciplinary dialogue that takes place is absolutely enriching and moves academics from the ivory tower. And also I think it challenges artists, because sometimes the artistic procedure implies that they need to go and do further research. As Diego was saying, ethnography is there, bring and do research on the music that actually conveys those sort of things. And all of these things, I think, also demands a very specific group of artists. Not every artist is done for this. So it's finding that community, that epistemic community that is willing to explore new avenues that makes this project so unique and so enriching. That's it. And trying to answer what's happening in Colombia. In terms of coca crops, in Colombia the coca crops start to grow and expand between 2016 and 2018, and they have still been sort of expanding. Colombia is still one of the largest exporters of cocaine in the world. Unfortunately, this is related with a really poor implementation of the peace agreement. Colombia saw the lowest levels of violence between 2016 and 2017. The FARC were committed to try to help dismantle the drug economy and some of the things that have been put in place by first sort of stopping the role that they used to play, that was to tax communities, and in some cases some of the units of the FARC were also involved in trade, so they stopped that. They the government was committed to support a coca growers organization in Colombia of these communities who wanted to actually do voluntary crop eradication. The Colombian government was committed at the time in 2017 to talk to campesinos in those regions who were not coca growers, to think about development projects, to think about building roads, to build aqueducts, and to actually support the crop substitution for some of the coca growers so that their families could actually move into a legal market. But unfortunately, this was not the case. Some of the coca organizations, coca growers and organizations were stigmatized. Some members of the FARC also went back to take up arms, a few of them, but in a context of deep distrust after the loss of the referendum in 2016. What happened was that there were some splintering groups of the FARC that stayed in some of the regions. The ELN, another insurgency, has been expanding and Now they have been saying that the Colombian government didn't honor the peace agreement with the FARC, so that they don't have any reason to actually trust that the Colombian government would deliver a peace agreement with them. So the ELN is growing in regions of Colombia, is fighting to try to establish control in Nariño, in Putumayo, is very strong in the border with Venezuela. In all of these regions we have coca crops, and we have also the paramilitary groups still operating in Colombia, trying to control regions like Urabá, expanding in other regions of the country. So the Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross, for example, says that in Colombia today we don't have one armed conflict, but 5 armed conflicts in 5 regions of the country, where unfortunately the peace agreement has not been implemented in regards to illicit drugs. And so Colombia is today in a really difficult moment. There is a deep distrust from campesinos, ethnic communities, and coca growers on the Colombian state and the possibilities of the Colombian state delivering what they promise. And they see the unfolding of violence, not only by illegal armed groups, but also by military campaigns of the Colombian army fighting these illegal armed groups. And so not only coca growing and cocaine continues to fuel the armed conflict, but also the violence is spreading against sectors of Colombian society who are willing to try to transform the realities in these regions. Colombia is in an electoral year now. In this electoral year, there have been the drug trafficking, and the peace agreement has been used to stigmatize some sectors of the population, and there is a deep sort of distrust on the Colombian state. And there is, when you go to Colombia and you talk to people in Colombia on the ground in some of the regions, there is a feeling that things need to change in Colombia. And Colombia is, we will see what happens in 2022. As Rodemos el Diálogo has said in the latest statement, peace is political. And if Colombia wants to see a way out to try to solve the drugs issue in Colombia, they need a government with the political will to try to do the structural transformations that were conceived at least in the peace agreement. So that would take space away from illegal armed groups, that would open a space for communities, that would give new opportunities to the youth and to women, and this would help transform the territories. It's not easy. It will take at least a decade to do some of those things, but without the will of the government would be impossible. So I hope that this animation conveys that deep concern that the communities have today in these regions of Colombia, and conveys the urgency that the world continues to pay attention to Colombia, because if there is something that has helped to keep a bit on track the implementation of some parts of the peace agreement, is that the international community has been constantly pushing the Colombian government to try to honor, some of the stipulations conceived in the peace agreement.
Thank you, Andre. And thanks to all of the panel for your insight. I'm just going to wrap up very briefly with a couple of comments. I think that we've heard today about an example of really meaningful collaboration between different organizations, artists, researchers, positive, negatives, human beings coming together with different expertise to try to make something that will show something, that will speak truth and have an impact. And I think that it's a really fantastic example of the power of research collaborations between research and art. In particular, insofar as art has the possibility to distill complexity without getting rid of complexity, without losing it from view, but distilling it into something that is simple to understand, but yet still faithful to reality, as Andre told us. And it's also, I think, very clear the power, and I think it was Sarah who mentioned this, the power of art to generate empathy. And I think that we can really see that in this video. And I think I'd like to bring it back in a way to two principles of Rodemos Diálogo that I mentioned at the beginning. The first one being co-responsibility. Here in the UK, this all might seem really remote to us, this far off jungle corner of Colombia with its lovely Pacific music and its armed groups and its exotic colors and beautiful colors. But it's actually not that disconnected from us, because the reason why the drug trade exists is because there is demand for it in countries like the UK. And so we are deeply connected as a country to the Colombian armed conflict, which has been so degraded and fueled by the cocaine trade. And if you think about the rise of knife crime in London that has been in the news in the last couple of years, we can also connect that indirectly, I'm sure, with the rise of drug trafficking in the wake of the failures of the implementation of the Colombian peace agreement and the increase in coca production following that. So I think that this film should be seen not just by people interested in Colombia, but also by people who are interested in the problems of drug consumption as a public health issue and as a crime issue here in the UK. And the second principle that I wanted to mention again was solidarity. And I think that this collaboration that we've heard about today is a really good example of solidarity with the protagonists of the film, who of course are not here with us today, but who have been involved in curating the telling of their story through their interviews, the interviews that they've given to researchers in the National University of Colombia. And I think the best way to help people like the protagonists of this film is to share the video. And solidarity is something that we can all do. It only takes a moment to share this video with people who you think will be touched by it, to who would benefit from hearing the message that it's sharing. And I'm sure that will also pave the way for further collaborations in the future between these fantastic teams who found such a great way of working together. Thank you very much to everyone for being here, and thank you especially to Integrillos for making the effort to be part of this panel all the way from Putumayo, who are also protagonists of this story and peace builders in their own right. This is such a beautiful film, really many congratulations. And thanks also to Natalia for all of her efforts doing the translation, and to Sarah, Andre, and to all of you for coming. And I think we will leave it there. And thank you very much.
Chicos, ¿cómo les parece?
Thank you guys. Bye.
Gracias.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Gracias a todos.
Muchachos, nos vemos mañana. Mañana
Chao.
por la tarde en español. Compartan.
Chao a todos y a todos.
Listo, compartan ese link.
Chao.
Un abrazo, gracias.